Hey, this is Evan Marc Katz, dating coach for smart, strong, successful women, your personal trainer for love. Welcome back to the Love You podcast, where you can learn everything there is to know about dating, relationships, and sex from a man's point of view. And you can find yourself into a relationship that makes you feel safe, heard, and understood. Uh, I have been interviewing people more this year than I ever have before, and I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing someone who, unlike everybody on the internet, is not trying to sell you anything. And I think that's really, really refreshing. Her heart's in the right place. She knows what she's talking about. She's experienced. She's wise. Her name is Rhoda Mills Sommer. Her brief bio: licensed psychotherapist in private practice for 44 years, podcaster for 10 years. Called her podcast is What Healthy People Know That You Don't. Focuses on the nitty gritty about what relationships require to survive. Her website is therapyideas.net, created back in 2003. Has 450 pages of free information without any ads. Worked with women in prison and jail. Director of the incest program for Pittsburgh Action Against Rape in 1980. This is a woman who's very much aligned with a mission, and I'm thrilled to talk to her today about our area of expertise, which is dating and relationships. And I'm sure she's going to add a lot of value because she has a completely different background than I do. And I always find those conversations to be among the juiciest. So, Rhoda, thanks for joining me on the Love You podcast. It's nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. So let's start here. And again, I'm not going to start where I thought we were going to start. You've got 40 years in social work. You see all sorts of people, right? Through, again, you're talking about jail and incest and rape. That is the far end. That's not most of my listeners. That's not my brand or anything like that. It's my clients generally, college educated, six-figure earners. It's not that they haven't dealt with some form of trauma, but we're dealing with people who might have a higher baseline. Having seen the spectrum of people who come to you, how do you see my audience, the women who have everything on paper except for this one thing? What differentiates them? And in some ways, how is their job different than a woman who's overcoming much more to get to the same place? Does it make sense?
Yes, I think it's an interesting question, and I think that it's got something to do with, at times, for many women, perfectionism and really wanting to get things right, to be successful, and then juggling all kinds of roles to make that work. And perfectionism is exhausting, and it's difficult to change because the reward is massive success.
Mm.
People love perfectionists as employees, as running companies. And so it's a wonderful thing for people to hire or to have running their companies. However, the women inside their heads, it's a hamster wheel of juggling and trying to get things right. And it's a very exhausting thing. And so, working with having a balance of being able to accept mistakes, for example, as Edison said, and probably Einstein, making mistakes is incredibly important to success. And people have a tough time accepting that. And personally, I think mistakes and failure are incredibly important. And accepting that darker side, that messiness. Part of perfectionism also is, I think, for your audience, that straight line of success. What I do for my clients is I make a box. I can do it with my arms. I make a box and I say, so you kind of got hooked on this straight American line of success, and it just
Mhm.
goes up and up and up. And then when you get hammered by some tragedy or some difficulty, I just had somebody text me that their 2-year old has a diagnosis of autism. And so something happens and pulls you into the messiness and the uncertainty. And that can be really difficult as a roller coaster ride, but I think it's also what life is about. I don't think life is a straight line of success. So accepting the messiness, accepting the uncertainty, and managing your anxiety through that process in other ways than perfectionism, because perfectionism is really a way to manage anxiety.
That's that's really cogent and really timely. I was just on the phone with a coach, someone who I'm talking to coaching me, and it hits me really personally because my whole life, my only belief was that I need to control my circumstances. No one else can do this. You have to. Life is what you make of it, and it leaves out so much, which is 99% of the world you don't control. You control your actions, reactions, but there's circumstances that are far, far bigger than you. So I think for people who are that sort of, type A academic hard work equals success thing, this is one thing where you could be the hardest working person in the world, and that doesn't always translate to success. And I think that's got to be difficult when you don't get the right feedback loop when you're doing all the things right.
There's a book I recommend called Embracing Uncertainty by Susan Jeffers, and she teaches you how to think in a way that incorporates the messiness of reality. I kind of consider myself a reality queen, not to everybody's pleasure, but I think I really believe that reality matters, and dealing with hard things is really super important.
I think that's great. I wrote that book down. Not something that was in my canon before, but I will absolutely check that out. And I joke about being a reality-based dating coach, where, I coach women, but it's not like I side with women or side with men. I'm just like, here's whatever you're observing is true. The question is, what are you going to do about the fact that women do X and men do Y? Complaining about it is not gonna get you anywhere. So I'm glad that we're already on the same page, which brings me to my first, you know, or, original question, which was you talk about dating in terms of uncertainty, where you say it's a dance in the not knowing,
Yes.
where nobody has no like when two people get together, nobody knows if there's going to be a storybook ending. How do you bring that reality to people so that they could digest that?
I think part of it is accepting rejection is a part of it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you are not worthy. And I think when somebody is securely attached to themselves, within themselves is a better way to put it, that they know they're not to everybody's liking. I know I'm not to everybody's liking as a therapist, and as any role actually. In fact, my when I got married very early in life and have been married for 51 years, and my husband, when I told our favorite professor at college I was marrying him, my professor said he must like a challenge. And I was young. I was 20.
Mhm.
I'm like, oh my goodness. But it was true. I knew, part of me knew that it was going to be a rare person who would appreciate who I was, and keeping your light under a barrel so that more people like you, which people pleasing is something that many women do get caught in, particularly if they're successful in moving up in a institution or a corporation. I think people pleasing is something people really enjoy and appreciate. And being able to be yourself and more truthful, more authentic, more, I don't really want to eat Italian again. I know it's your favorite, but could we try Ethiopian? Something that little bit of pushback, that little bit of disagreement. You don't want to just, oh, sure, I'll do that. Sure, that sounds great. You wanted a little bit of rhythm. It doesn't have to be even Steven, but you want to taste each other's worlds and see if you enjoy the different flavors.
I think a lot of women that I work with, well, again, and I think we could just talk about them like a spectrum. They're people who are like me, who control everything their whole life as an exercise in trying to control their environments. And then there are people who had childhoods where everything was completely out of control. Their survival skills was placating their parents and being agreeable and not wanting to raise their hand or assert boundaries lest they get verbally, physically abused or something like that. And so it becomes a big reinvention. These are women who might be powerful at work, but when it comes to personal boundaries, that's they're overcoming a long past. Does
Yes,
does that amateur diagnosis of
yes,
mine make any sense?
yes, I think that that's absolutely true. And I also think it's incumbent upon us, even as a therapist, if I am somebody who has not worked as a client myself, I'm not going to be a good therapist.
Mm.
You have to understand and figure out your own childhood trauma and your own childhood baggage. You don't want to clutter up somebody else by believing they're going to fix what you missed out on in childhood. So I really am a big believer in individual therapy to own and take responsibility and understand how to carry that load. Making pain bearable is one of the main things that I think therapy is about. And when you are able to carry it, and not let it steer the ship. You don't want your unfinished business to steer the ship.
Sure.
You want it sitting in the back, maybe as some ballast, to keep you steady because you understand how to carry it.
Okay.
That
I
might
got
be too many metaphors.
No, it's right. People who are regular listeners of mine are very familiar with mixed metaphors that may or may not entirely land. Um, so I want to ask about your podcast because again, the title itself is so striking. What healthy people know that you don't.
Couples. What
Couples.
healthy couples know that you don't.
My apologies.
No, that's okay. My
So,
husband gave me the title.
so I think it has an air of truth to it, but it's a truth that sort of stings.
Yes.
And it's again, it's why I'm gravitating towards it because I feel like if I again come from a functional family, a secure attachment style, do this kind of work after some trial and error, um, and basically surround myself by other people who are in a very similar world. I feel like if you ask any happily married couple, and they do exist, right, right, to describe the dynamic of their relationship, you're going to get like 90% overlap between amateurs and pros about what a good relationship looks and feels like, where there's all variations of dysfunction on the outside. And then there's just this one lane that kind of works and everybody figures it out, whether they are a therapist or not. Does that have any ring of truth to you? Because that's my, again, amateur observation about happy couples is most of them, I feel like they can do a lot of my job.
I think two things. They need two things. My belief in the path would be there has to be respect for the differences.
Hmm.
Navigating that respect for differences, that you don't have to be clones. I think a lot of times people arrive with that idea of love. There's a scene in a Woody Allen movie where he turns the nurse into himself, and of course she's beautiful, and but he says everybody wants a clone, and I think we want people to be like us. Why don't you understand? I mean, at this stage of life, it's even little things like oh my God, you can't park anymore. Really? you know, and but being able to give people room for their differences, that means I don't say it. I think it, but I don't say it because it's really unnecessary. There's plenty of room for parking, and I'll even offer to correct sometimes because I if parking is tight. I think so. Respect for differences leaves room. And I like respect better than love. I always say love is great for beginnings, but respect is great for the longevity of relationships. And so there's got to be room for the differences. The second thing is you have to be able to talk about hard things. You have to be able to talk about hard things.
In a way that respects and validates rather than invalidates someone else's position. It can't just be I'm right, you're wrong, and
Right,
because I say I'm right, then by default you're wrong.
right. It's it really is about being curious instead of critical. I
Mm.
think a lot of times when we start taking each other for granted, we can easily fall into the criticism. It's such a natural thing to do, you know, and being able to take responsibility for recognizing that there's times where it fits and there's times where it doesn't. And again, that's the messiness of taking responsibility. It's not a clear black, white, 110 thing. It's a
Sure.
4, 5, 6 gray in the middle, and it's messy. And it depends on the situation. But if you enter that situation with respect, then there's room for people to breathe. You're not backing them into a corner with your belief system.
If you see me looking down, I'm taking notes. Um, what I'm sharing is going to show up on my coaching call tonight.
I
So,
used to I used to hand out index cards to my clients. And when I did workshops for therapists, I'd carry a deck of index cards. And I would say I probably hand out 4 or 5 a session because there's something about the tangibility. And then one of my clients said that I guess his sister had come to see me at a different time period, not in the same space, but she went in his glove compartment. She said, "Oh, these are Rhoda's index cards." And he went, "Yeah, you're not allowed to look." And they'd been there for years because I wouldn't see two people in a family at the same time. And but the tangibility of really thinking about how can I be curious instead of critical, that's a really valuable thing.
I I think it's great, and I think there's something elegantly simple about it, and it's not surprising after 40 plus years in practice, you're going to have your catchphrases that distill your message into something that's the size of an index card. I have stuff that's sort of similar. I'm just writing yours down because they're new and they very much overlap with what I talk about here. Um, so one of the biggest concerns that people have, and again, it's a little cart before the horse, is you're dating someone new, right? And I say it's like you're trying to read the last page of the book before you read the book.
That's
Everybody
good.
wants to
Yeah.
know, I don't want to get hurt. I don't want to waste my time. What can I figure out right up front that's going to prevent me from getting hurt and wasting time? So, since we're going to be talking more about compatibility, what can anybody tell someone during dating that would function as a red flag, one to act on, not the false red flags that a lot of people have, but a real one that people tend to overlook?
I think black, white thinking and feeling and or 110 thinking and feeling. When
Mm.
somebody is rigid, and that's what 110 black white means. It means there's not a flexibility of that 4, 5, 6, and 7 or the gray. And being able to have that room to move. So when somebody's very rigid, this is right and this is wrong. I mean, of course, murder is wrong. Okay. But there are lots of things in between. And being able to have some ability to dialogue instead of monologue. I think a lot of dates tend to monologue. And it's funny because I was teaching somebody actually very successful many, many years ago. And he would be so proud of himself when he'd start the session by asking me a question about myself to prove that he had learned how to stop monologuing. And I think that it's such an important thing. Being able to truly dialogue does not mean you're steering the conversation to a certain place. It means like your conversation with me right now. We're wandering around, but we've got themes going, we've got some patterns cooking, and it's a very much a back and a forth. It is not just me monologuing or you monologuing. There is a real dialogue going on here. So dialogue instead of monologue, not black and white thinking or 1 or 10 thinking. And then I'm going to talk about when somebody wants you to love them no matter what. I think it's a sign of manipulation.
The
And
oh, if you don't like me at my worst, right? That's a common women's meme. If you don't love me at my worst,
yes,
then you don't deserve my best.
and I personally believe, here's what I believe love is. I think love is wanting to be a better person for the person you love. I wince when I remember how young I was spilling over onto my very overly patient husband. And but I accept I was young. People in their 20s are young. And they don't you don't get the prefrontal lobe wired with chemicals until 25, 26, 27. So personally, I'm the generation that said don't trust anybody over 30. I think that's hysterically funny. So it's ridiculous. But when you really love somebody, you want to be a better person. And that's what I think is the core of love.
Can I jump in
Yes. Yep.
with
Absolutely.
permission so it's not a monologue? Um, and I'm conscious of that too. Uh, I agree, certainly in principle, and I wrote it down. Love is being a better person for the person you love. Nice and catchy and tight. One of the things that I see that seems to be the most long-term corrosive is women will often bet on men and their potential, hoping they change. He
Yeah.
can be a better person. He wants to be a better person. He wants to be faithful. He wants to work on his anger. He wants to be able to commit. He knows I deserve better. And I tell them generally to run. You can't have a relationship dependent upon someone changing for you. But I agree in within the context of a marriage, you're sort of constantly taking responsibility for where you are and what you're doing. I just see too many people hoping that the guy
Absolutely.
turns into the person she wants him to be versus, okay, this is just who he is.
There's a Broadway play with the title I Love
Love
You.
you, you're
And
perfect, now change.
yes, and I'm not saying that either. I'm saying that as a more mature person, you are going to honestly face your own dark side. And when you're aware of your mistakes and ways you can improve, you make a serious, sincere effort. So, one of the things I would tell those women to look for is do their actions match their words? Women get seduced by words. And one of my recommendations on my dating page of the website is watch it. If you don't want to read, I'm so sad about people not reading. Read Jane Austen, Mansfield Park, or rent the movie. The movie says charm is dangerous, and it is. I mean, charm covers up some really bad stuff. And that movie demonstrates it. The book demonstrates it. Jane Austen is always writing about looking for character. And I think character really matters. Character about who somebody is. Do their actions match their words? And one of the places I tell women to go to meet somebody?
I
Volunteering.
sure. I
And my husband joined.
you could probably meet a lot of women that way.
My husband used to go to laundromats, but he also, when I started a hotline in college, back then there were a lot of bad trips and things going on. And I was in college and I started a hotline, and my husband joined the hotline and volunteered. And volunteering is a serious effort about wanting to do something in the world besides complaining about it. you know, and certainly there's lots to complain about, that's for sure. But being able to look for character, and I'm serious about, if you don't want to read, rent movies. Pride and Prejudice, they're all substantial men with character.
Again, I love that you led us there because people who are, regular listeners to this podcast know that I always talk about, five characteristics every guy has to have for you to be happy: character, kindness, consistency, communication, commitment. Without any one of them, your relationship is going to be rocky. And so I love that you're leading with character. And it speaks to me. I met a girlfriend volunteering once upon a time. Uh, so again, I'm reflexively agreeing with everything you're saying. So as women are processing this, and I do a lot of sort of hand gesticulations and Venn diagrams, there's all the stuff people hear me say all the time, and then you're new here, and then they're trying to find the overlap in the message, what they could take away. What is a healthy sign of compatibility for someone who's listening, who, most people think compatibility, of course, is similarity, where compatibility, lots of people are similar but have unhappy relationships. So what is compatibility to you as a 72-year-old woman?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, respecting the differences is really crucial. And a test of whether or not the differences are respected is, are you able to influence each other? If it's a heterosexual relationship, does he allow you to influence him? And do you allow him to influence you?
And we'd say if the answer is yes, that's a healthy sign.
Yes. Yes. Second, being able to communicate about hard things. So, you've been paying for the last 3 dates. I'd like a turn. I'm successful too. I'd like a turn. I don't know how you feel about that, but let's talk about it. Okay. Um, how do you feel about delaying sex? Being able to talk about hard things is important.
And the alternative, of course, is people sort of playing games and pretending, getting into sort of guessing games, wishful thinking. As long as we don't talk about it, it's not there, but it's always there.
And I love how all of us, when our imagination fills the vacuum, we have entire conversations with the other person that we don't do in real life. And there's been a couple I watch a lot of foreign TV. There's been a couple of shows with men who are not talking, and I'm sitting there going, just explain explain what was going on, because we know, because we're watching the show. But he just can't say what he really
Right.
thinks.
So that's again, let's say that that's real. There's the male inarticulateness with their own feelings. And then there's, I don't know how to say it any other way, but maybe this will be triggering: female cowardice, which is, as long as we don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. I want to get married and have kids one day. He's never brought it up once. And so for the past year and a half, I've been a dutiful girlfriend. We are in love. We have great times together, such a strong connection. But I know if I actually bring up marriage and kids, the thing's probably going to die right then and there. So I'm just not going to talk about it.
Yes, you're right. That happens a lot. Absolutely. And it's too bad. I think courage is hard. But I think, and that's one of the things in therapy, I would say to my clients, I would say, I'm practice. My needs are not in this room right now. If I tell you a story about me, it's to help you.
Right.
But when you are practicing with me, this isn't going to do any good unless you take it outside of the room and say it to the people that are really important to you. And so thinking about practicing courage. So maybe you start out in a small step by saying, I don't want to eat Italian again. That's my favorite. I would never say that. But anyway, I digress. But being able to take little steps, intentional steps of being more truthful, and that is how you find the path to courage.
I love it. Thank you. Um, so there are certain words, and it's one of the things when I was looking at the questions I was going to ask you today, because we want to have a juicy conversation, we want to have an interesting interview, um, and I was like, I want to make sure that we avoid relationship podcast cliches because everything has been poured over so many times. There's so many people who are doing versions of this. How do we make this catch actionable different? So I've got your question here. What are the biggest communication mistakes people make in relationships? And we can say communication, 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 communication over and over and over. It doesn't have any tangible meaning, right? Until people can identify what they're doing that's getting in their own way, right? So how do we make this practical and not just say communicate better?
So I also think that most couples come to therapy saying communication is the big problem. And I always think to myself, really, it's about a power struggle that's underneath communication. But the
Mm.
biggest communication problem, I think, are unspoken resentments. Resentments layer and just like an onion, pile on top of each other, and they're not spoken. And okay, we haven't we I've been waiting way too long for sex and I'm really unhappy about it, and I don't okay, I'm just going to suck it up.
So,
And
let's get into let's break it up piece by piece because I know it could turn into a monologue because you have so much experience. So if that's the case, and I'm playing devil's advocate, even though I 100% agree with everything you're saying. But if I'm playing devil's advocate, well, part of the reason I don't talk about this stuff is that I know if I talked about this stuff, it would cause friction, resentment, and argument. So the easier thing to do is I'm not defending it. The easier thing to do is to just bury it. We're just trying to get along. We're just trying to raise a family. And
short-term
I know
thinking.
he gets really upset when I bring this up.
That's short-term thinking. You are afraid of the short term. Long-term thinking, and we are sadly lacking in long-term thinking in our culture at large. Long-term thinking is, I need to be authentic and let him see who or her, whoever, who I really am. And if I let them see who I really am, then I am chosen for who I really am. And then we're going to have something that we can really build on. Because the truth is, unspoken resentments destroy relationships long term. Sure, you can get away with maybe 5, 6 years even. Relationships tend to fall apart years 6 to 10. Look at the movie stars. It's amazing how often it's true. 6 to 10 is because that's when the illusions fall off. So let's get a head
It's
start.
also where the California state laws about the woman getting 50% of the estate comes in, which is why I think Tom Cruise got divorced Nicole Kidman on like day 364. I get your larger point. There are absolute patterns to when relationships break up and when they reach their breaking point of not communicating. But we also see that people build their way through it for 20, 30 years,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then they only let it out when the kids are out of the house.
But is that
Oh, I'm
absolutely?
not defending. I'm saying I'm
Yeah.
observing the pattern that
It's
you're
not,
observing.
it's not, I used to, there's an area in Pittsburgh called Fox Chapel. I call it the Fox Chapel thing, is wait till the kids go to college and poof, they're gone. I mean, the relationship is over. And it's, it's sad because you've invested all that time and nobody's ever going to feel like about the same way about your kids as you. I don't care who they are. They're just not. And being able to really have a relationship with somebody and building an infrastructure that will work over the long haul is worth it.
Uh, is there something tangible that someone can do if they recognize that this is a pattern that they have? Because it's one thing to say, talk about hard things, then there's the mechanism by which they talk about hard things.
Write a letter, And I'm always having people write letters, even to dead people. I have them write letters.
Sure.
So write a letter and write two letters. The first one can be an angry dump, and the second one can be something you could actually imagine giving to the other person. And it doesn't mean you have to give it to them. It doesn't mean you have to say it, but then you could practice maybe saying a piece of it. You could write down and ask them, look, it's really hard for me to talk about this stuff, so I wanted to write it down and give you time to think about it. And then could we talk about it later?
Have you ever read the book Kiss Your Fights Goodbye?
No.
Dr. Jamie Turndorf. And it might be stuff you've already studied or you know instinctively, but it talks about the sort of autonomic nervous system, the fight or flight mechanism, where historically, guy does something wrong, woman is triggered, complains. Guy's first reaction is to either defend and fight back or to pull away, fight or flight. So there's a mechanism by which you communicate that doesn't trigger that because you have an issue, but you're not attacking him or making him wrong. And so that's my frame around the write in the letter. If your letter is just
No.
not just the angry one, I think
Right.
it's very hard for people to have these things, the I feel statement rather than the you are statement.
Well, and also we have a problem that we need to talk about.
And it's you.
And I have a part in it. And if you can begin the letter by owning your part because you've already dumped the angry letter first, so then you're able to kind of do the second letter with a little more thoughtfulness, that's another key. And being able to be thoughtful and not just emotional. Because thoughtfulness is going to balance that communication message so that there really can be some dialogue.
I agree wholeheartedly. I just think it's really hard for people to kind of get out of
Absolutely.
their own way, their own story. You talk about flexible thinking, and my observation, it's not my observation, just taken from other folks, is that we all tend to be lawyers, right? Advocates for ourselves and our point of view, rather than trying to be an impartial judge, right?
And that's a
What's
lot.
what incorporates both people's realities and both people's points of view? We
And
just
that's what
argue our case,
And that's what I do sitting in the third seat
right?
when I'm with a couple. And so you can imagine yourself, you can begin even with just your imagination, which is imagine yourself in your partner's seat, being your partner, hearing the letter.
Mhm.
And then imagine yourself in my seat, the therapist seat, and see if you can hold, because that's part of wisdom, is holding two opposite things at the same time. And what we get caught in is what I call hierarchical thinking, which is I win, you lose, you win, I lose. And that's not what it's about. It's about, and I don't know if you can see, but they're in different positions. My hands are in different positions. And that is how quietly sitting next to each other with the differences. And if your audience can leave with that in their image in their head of two people sitting quietly next to each other with their differences, with respect, then you can begin pieces of those conversations.
That that's inspiring because we know it's possible. I think for people who haven't had that, it becomes daunting. I mean,
Absolutely.
the sort of the John Gottman 70% of fights are the same fight over and over, which would surprise absolutely nobody, right? And because people don't fundamentally change, it is very much just a lack of respect for the other person's point of view. It doesn't wouldn't it make sense for them to just change to be who I want them to be? So I have an observation, and you could shoot it down. Uh, and I might get in trouble for saying this, but I don't really mind. I think in general, there's a lot of men who are not capable of being the kind of partner that women need.
Yes.
Right? I don't have a number, but I always say like 90% of men are incapable of it. It sounds really harsh, but in reality, it often proves to be true. It's not that they're all stupid and lazy and
No.
It's just they don't have the components to be really good, self-aware, sensitive partners. So there's that piece of it. The other piece of it is it seems to me that women more than men expect men to be like them, to cater to their needs, to read their minds. The expectations of what a good husband should be are far greater than what a good wife should be, I think. And so it's almost like men are set up for failure, even though a lot of them are failing. I think the expectations are out of line with reality. If he were a good husband, he would go vegan because I'm vegan. If he were a good husband, he would load the dishwasher the way I load the dishwasher, right? And so
I agree.
build on that because again, I don't want to sound like
I
I'm a coach for women. I don't want to attack women. I
I
have to, yeah.
think I think expectations in general uh, can cut two ways. They can be too little and they can be too much. And more women have too many. I asked a woman to write her expectations down. This is years and years and years ago. She came in with 32 expectations of what her future husband should be. And I did laugh and I probably it was a long time ago, but I was like, you're kidding. I just like, whoa. And there's something about a good man with a good heart who's trying and accepting because I do think women don't necessarily understand. I remember somebody who said, he brought me flowers, he brought me chocolate, but he should have taken me out to dinner. And I was like, no, no, that's too much. And it's recognizing that maybe you didn't get enough in childhood, or maybe you're trying to have a perfect life, or maybe your idea of who somebody else should be, maybe you need to apply it more to yourself and recognize we are all human beings and we're all struggling and we're all trying to be the best that we can be. And
So
having more self awareness is really important to being generous to other people.
I'm going to be our listener right now, uh, because I agree that the metaphor I use is that every woman has a rule book in her head that no man's ever read, right? So guys are going to get it wrong a majority of the time because he doesn't know the thing, and you say, well, that's why I'm telling him. Here's what I want, right? But I can imagine someone listening to this podcast and saying, well, you're saying, Rhoda, I should have the difficult conversations. I should tell him how I want him to meet my needs. And you're also saying that my expectations are too high. Should I just be settling the fact that no man is ever going to do all the things I want him to do? Do I just have to accept that?
So, no, it's about that messy middle ground we've been talking about since the beginning, which is you have to have a Geiger counter inside of yourself. And the woman who wrote down 32 things did not have an inner Geiger counter. You need a Geiger counter. Good heart, good, good trying, wanting to understand you, respecting, willing to negotiate. If somebody's willing to negotiate with you, but if you come across so heavy handed, this is what it should be. The dishwasher should be this way. I still remember Larry saying to me, Rhoda, if you, and he's a friend, not a husband, uh, he said, if you want the dishwasher loaded a certain way, then you can do it. And this was at Thanksgiving. And I went, oh my goodness, you're totally right. I'm so sorry. I was just trying to jam a lot in. And yes, go ahead, keep going. It's fine. I'll be quiet. But I've told that story probably 150 times over the years. My expectation about that moment was wrong. And when you have self awareness, you can differentiate when you're asking too much and when you need to ask for more. It's that messy middle ground that people just want certainty so much.
And we're all experts in what we sacrificed, what we gave up, where we
Yes,
compromised. No, there
yes.
was that time I could have jumped down your throat, but I let it go. You wore your shoes into the house, right? You tracked mud, and I cleaned it up. I didn't even say anything to you, right?
I'm collecting stamps. That's what
Right.
transactional
Right. So
analysis
we're
called it.
all experts in the sacrifices we make, and we have zero consciousness of how other people bend over backwards to please us. Right. So it's just everybody's sort of keeping score. And the worst relationships are the people who are keeping score in their own head. And if you're keeping score, you're already losing.
That's right. It's it's not about score, and it's not about even Steven. It's about this back and forth shuttling between two people who care. And that's the way you want to do with your thinking and your feeling. You want to shuttle back and forth with your thinking and feeling.
Great. So let's anchor on that because, again, I'm going to play our listener right now. It's not always a charitable interpretation. Rhoda, I've done that. I have compromised. Right? I have communicated. Right? I always feel like I'm the giver. I'm the only one who's working on the relationship. I'm the one. My answer to that, and you could correct me if you think I'm wrong, is if that is indeed true, you could have a better relationship. And you can't overgive to the right kind of partner. You only feel like you're overgiving because you're with a selfish partner who is unaware. He doesn't respect you, right? Like you're just giving to the wrong person. It's not that you're necessarily doing anything wrong. You've expected too much from this guy, and you're still hoping after 1, 5, 10, 20 years that he rises to the occasion. It's time to cut bait. So, I know there's people listening who are like, no, but I do all these things, and their biggest problem is that they choose the wrong men and then they double down on these men.
I think you have to look at your pattern of choosing the wrong men. And I I think that I think it's complicated. I don't think it's a simple equation.
Sure.
And I do believe I'm debating whether to say this. I do believe that we can tend toward that martyr belief. And I also think you may need help. It might be that simple. Go to therapy, look at yourself, and then ask your partner to go to therapy, couples. But you have to find a good couples person. That's not a small thing because a lot of people back into couples therapy. There was a title of a magazine, Psychotherapy Networker, one year, and it said, the dirty little secret of psychotherapy, most people are bad at couples. And I think it's true. I think it's a much more complicated business. And what I love about couples is that both people have to trust me and both people have to let me challenge them. And so I can go back and forth between both people. So that person who believes they're the giver is going to have a hard time recognizing that maybe they have 5% of the problem, 15% of the problem, depending on their own lack of self.
Yeah. And I think that's key. And that's literally all you can control as long as you're doing the best you can. In my work, again, not a LCSW. Um, I say about 80% of the job is picking the right kind of guy, character, kindness, consistency, communication, commitment. That's choosing the right guy. If you choose the wrong guy, nothing you do. You could be a relationship genius. It could be you. You can't fix a broken man. So choosing the right guy is important. And then 20% is how you show up in the relationship and sanding off those rough edges and taking responsibility for your role in the dynamic. How does that feel to you, amateur to professional?
That's good. I like it. I think one of the dating questions I would have my clients ask is, what did you learn about yourself that you need to improve from your last important relationship?
Mm.
Not a lot of
What,
people.
what what's one of the things that you hear the most?
Uh, I don't ask it. I mean, my clients have those answers, okay? I'm telling them when they go on a date And not the first date. I'm not saying you do it the first date, but you ask what they learned about themselves. And it's always something unique. I mean, everybody, if you've really taken responsibility and you've learned something about what you need to improve, and that's if somebody can answer that question, that is magnificent.
I agree, and I'm gonna go so far to say that most people's learning post relationship is what's wrong with their partner and what they don't want in
Yeah,
a
I
partner.
know.
It's
That's
not
true.
so much looking in the mirror at themselves and their behavior and how it reflects back. I didn't realize how important it was to find a guy who makes his own money. I didn't realize how important it was to found a man who agrees with me politically because we were fighting about like it's going to be external rather than internal. So then how can someone extract here's what I did wrong rather than choosing the wrong man? How could anybody extract what they did in quotes wrong in their previous relationship?
I think it's pretty easy if you have self-awareness. I mean, if you are really looking at yourself, I don't care who you are, everybody contributes. It's two people to destroy a relationship. It's not one. It is
Mm,
always two. And that's why I use numbers to get people that are very defensive and insecure. You're pretty insecure if you can't answer that question. I'm in my mind. It's security is truly knowing your own Achilles heel and
mm,
accepting that. And so being able to say, oh, yeah, this is what I did. And I was selfish in the relationship, or I wasn't as open as I needed to be to negotiation. I kind of looked at it as a dirty word because I liked having my way. Whatever. You can, so I'll say to people, you have at least 5%. And then sometimes I have to say, how about 3%? Because they really don't want to go there.
that's what I mean. That's what I mean. This is why it's such a difficult conversation. The easier thing to do is I'm
Blame.
refining my broken man picker by learning what my deal breakers are. So I'm more conscious of that than I've ever been before.
And
But where you're the common denominator that you bring into every relationship, I think that almost, I mean, we can talk about self-awareness, that almost needs to be pointed out from the outside.
blame is definitely in a more immature attitude, period. That's what 3-year-olds, it's their fault. It's never their fault.
I think it's, and maybe it's why I emphasize it so much. It's so much easier to reach someone by saying, hey, it's not your fault, right? The problem is you are attracted to unhealthy men and unhealthy relationships, and then you think the power of your love will redeem it, right? But if we could eliminate 80% of the problem, we could at least put you in the realm of choosing decent men, communicators, husband type guys, a lot of the problems go away.
Yes.
Now we're left with now maybe we can hold up the mirror because you can get if you're talking with a secure man, he is going to listen to you. He does want to please you. And if he feels like he's walking on eggshells all the time, that is a cause to reflect.
Yes, I agree.
I'm not used to someone with so many opinions just agreeing. So I'm grateful for that. Um, what a lovely conversation this has been.
Yes,
And
I've
I'm
enjoyed
and a genuine conversation with someone who clearly has passion and experience and wisdom that is worth sharing. And I rarely take this many notes, but I got a whole thing of notes that I'm going to try to figure out how to distill and give credit for when I coach next. Rhoda, how can people find you?
Oh, what healthy couples know that you don't is on every platform. And my website, therapyideas.net, has 25 things to be aware of when you're dating and 9 healthy things to look for. Interesting, I have more bad things than good things.
Not terribly surprising. And you could also find her everywhere on social media at Rhoda on Couples. To me, my guess is even though she's got her Well, catchphrases. I would think the long form Rhoda, the podcast Rhoda, would probably be the one that you can get the most from if you're going to be digging deep on relationships, especially if you're part of a couple. Usually, people who turn to me are
Yes.
between couples, so it's where we overlap, and you can be of great value and service to the women who are listening here today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our
Oh, that's
audience?
it. Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed this very much. My name is Evan Mark Katz. This is the Love You podcast. If you have enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe to us on Apple or Spotify or YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a positive review. They do make a difference and help us with the algorithm. And stay tuned for next week. We always have really interesting conversations here about important stuff with smart people. So thanks for listening. I appreciate you, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Bye bye.